My favorite time of year for camping is definitely the fall. It's the prettiest because the leaves are changing, but you also get the nice warm days and the cool nights. Spring's great too, and summer's doable as long as you can get out of the hot and humid southeast. But for a lot of people, winter is that time of year where they don't really go camping a whole lot. And I'm hoping by watching this video you can open up a whole new season of camping. Around me I've got several heating options, and while these are great options, before you get any of this stuff you definitely have to have a good sleeping bag. A heater can run out of fuel, the battery could die, it could go bad. That doesn't happen with a sleeping bag. When you buy a winter sleeping bag, there are often two numbers that you need to pay attention to. One of them is the survival rating and one of them is the comfort rating. With the survival rating, if it's that temperature, you will survive the night, but you will not be comfortable and you will not get a whole lot of sleep. So look at the comfort rating, and you want to get one that's going to be a few degrees below the temperature that you expect so that you will be comfortable. And keep in mind that everyone sleeps at a different temperature as well. It's worth adding, if you see a sleeping bag that only has one number, that one number is the survival rating. The best winter sleeping bags are going to be the mummy sleeping bags. Those are the ones that are kind of form-fitting, and you want one that has a hood that comes up over, because as soon as you cover your hood you're saving a whole lot of body temperature. You also want to look out for cinches so that you can tighten it up, so you have just your little face poking out. You obviously don't want your face inside the sleeping bag because you're introducing moisture in there. Ones that can cinch up around here are pretty nice as well. And then you also want to look for draft blockers, which is kind of a little flap that goes down the side of the zipper, and it covers the zipper so you're not losing a lot of heat through there. It's also worth picking up a nice sleeping bag liner. That's like another little bag that goes inside the sleeping bag, and there's a number of advantages to that. The first one is it's going to raise the temperature of the sleeping bag, so it's going to make it even warmer, even more comfortable. It's also going to stop you from sweating into your sleeping bag if you do end up getting too hot. And of course it does make the sleeping bag temperature easier to adjust because you can unzip the side of the sleeping bag and you still will stay relatively warm inside the sleeping bag liner. By the way, as I go through all of this stuff, I'm going to put links to everything that I have and everything I use. The sleeping bag that I personally have is not amazing, like it's not going to be a sub-zero sleeping bag. It's best for a little below freezing, and then obviously when you add the sleeping bag liner, it drops it a little more. If you're in a ground tent, you're also going to want something to sleep on, something that's insulated. If you don't, you're going to lose a ton of heat to the ground and you're going to get condensation problems. I personally use this monster. This is a self-inflating mattress. You just unscrew the valves at each end and then pop off the bungee here and it unrolls, it inflates itself, and when you want to put it up again next day, you make sure these are undone, you just kind of roll it up and squeeze all the air out. This is fantastic. I've used this a bunch. I've slept in my awning room a few times, so I use this when I'm doing that. And also I've slept in the back of the 4Runner, and you don't need any insulation underneath you for sleeping back in the 4Runner, but it's just really, really comfortable and fits perfectly. This is actually the most comfortable camping mattress that I have ever slept on. This is more comfortable than the mattress that's in my rooftop tent, so I really recommend this. Anyway, I'm gonna put this away and let's look at some of our heating options. This is the most compact heating option that I have, and this is the only one that you can leave inside a rooftop tent. It is a 12-volt heated blanket. Plugs into a little cigarette lighter. And actually, this one's not mine. I stole it from a friend who uses it every time they go out camping. For around $30 to $50, this is not only the simplest option, it's also the cheapest option. However, it is something you do not want to run on your starter battery. This thing is a power hog. In fact, anytime you're using electrical heat, it uses a ton of electricity. So you will unfortunately also need some form of power, a second battery or one of the battery packs that you can buy from Jackery or Goal Zero. When it's running, this pulls about 50 watts at 12 volts. So you're going to need a battery that has a fairly significant capacity, probably around 30 amp hours. Another thing to remember is when it's cold out, battery capacity or battery life goes down, especially if you've got something lithium ion or something like my Jackery that I have here. This has more than 30 amp hours, but if it gets really, really cold, it's not going to last nearly as long, and it's also not very good to run lithium batteries at really low temperatures. A heated blanket also obviously only heats you, and that has a couple of disadvantages. First of all, if you're with family or with pets, then you need a heated blanket for each of them, although I guess a pet could just sleep on top of you. But if you've got you and a partner, then you'd need 2 heated blankets, and then you're doubling the amount of battery you're using, and you're going to end up with some significant battery draw. Secondly, you're not heating the tent itself, so you may still end up with condensation issues, which are fairly common in the cold. If you're in a ground tent, that's not a huge deal, but if you're in a rooftop tent, that can be a problem, because when you fold up the tent the next morning, all the wet interior of the tent is going to fold up onto your bedding, which will make you even colder the next night. I'll put a link to this in the description, but I will say this one, along with most 12-volt heated blankets, is not particularly large. It's definitely not long enough to cover my entire body. I guess if you're short, it would do the job. Now, you could get a 110-volt one that plugs into the wall, and use an inverter with that. You can get them bigger, so they can cover your entire body or go completely underneath you. They also generally get a little bit hotter, but they're also going to use a whole lot more electricity because you're going to have to run them off an inverter, so you're losing a lot of efficiency there because you got to run the inverter itself, and of course it just uses more power because it's bigger and hotter, so you're going to end up using at least probably around double what this would use. This is a Mr. Buddy heater, and while it's a little more expensive than the heated blanket itself, because you don't need a second battery to run this is going to be overall the simplest and cheapest option, and is probably right now the most popular option with campers. However, I think going forward that's going to start to change. These heaters cost around $80, although when I bought mine it was a little bit less, and when I looked on Amazon earlier it was a little bit more, and they run off propane, which is great because it gives you a lot of heat and it gives it that heat instantly. You can run off a couple of different bottle sizes. Normally you put the 1 pound bottles on here, screw them in and run it off that. You can buy an adapter for another $20, $25 that allow you to run off a 20-pound tank or a 5-pound tank, one of those refillable ones. And it uses about half a pound, or maybe about a third of a pound to about half a pound per hour, which means if you're using the 1 pound bottles, you're looking at 3 or 4 of those per night, depending on the setting that you put it on, and obviously how long you're sleeping. Even though these are probably the most popular source of heat, I'm not a fan at all, and I will never use one of these in a tent again. The first problem I have with this is that it's mainly radiant heat. Now that feels great if you're sleeping right in front of it or if you're stood right in front of it, but it's not particularly effective at heating the air itself. It will heat it some, but if you're in a large area, it's not going to produce a lot of heat for that area. The other issue, or another issue I have with it, is that it actually can make condensation worse inside your tent. Burning propane releases water vapor, and all of that's coming out inside your tent, and it's going to end up, if it's cold enough, end up condensing inside your tent. I have used one of these before, and it's about 0 degrees, and I end up with sheets of ice down the inside of my tent. The main reason I would never use one of these though is safety. There are multiple issues with using one of these inside a tent, and for a community that's so focused on safety in some aspects, it's crazy how many people will use one of these inside a tent. First of all, it's an open flame that you've got inside a tent with bedding around you. Now these do have a sensor in them, so if they end up tipping over like this, they do shut off, but obviously it's still hot on the front here. When I use this, and I did use this inside my tent for a while, when I use this inside my tent, I always put it in a metal baking tray, so if I accidentally end up knocking it over, it wouldn't melt anything, it wouldn't set fire to anything, it'd be safe inside the tray. But obviously you still have the risk of bedding touching it. If you had kids or pets, there's no way I'd have one of these inside the tent with me. The second safety issue I have is the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning with this. Normally when you burn this, when you burn propane, it produces carbon dioxide and water vapor, but if there's not enough oxygen in the air, then it will start producing carbon monoxide instead, which will kill you in your sleep. Now this does have a little sensor built in that will turn it off when there's not enough oxygen in the air, but I struggle to trust that, especially considering some of the other reliability issues that I've seen with this heater. When I used this, I had a little carbon monoxide detector and alarm that I keep in the tent with me as well. Finally, I have seen what happens when these things go wrong. This is a picture of one of my buddy's tents after his heater just went wrong. We don't actually know what happened to it. It was upright, it's unmodified, it was using a 1 pound tank like it's designed for. We don't know what caused it. And after seeing that, I stopped using these. The next two heaters I've got are these, and these are heat exchangers. What that means is that the combustion or the burning of the fuel takes place separately from the heated air or the air that comes into your tent or your vehicle or whatever you're heating. So for example, with this one, all of the burning goes on inside here. You've got the air in for the burning or the combustion. You've got the exhaust that comes out here. Both of these are from outside of the vehicle or outside of the tent. And then separately, you've got a fan that pulls air in through here, and this could be circulated from the tent or it could be outside air, and then it heats the air inside here through conduction, and then it blows the hot air out of this end. Now both these heaters come with their own ducting, but I like to get some extra, and I'll put links to this stuff as well. This is great because it just goes, it folds up, that was probably horrible audio, but it folds up really compact like that and stretches out when you need it. And it would just attach on the end here, and you just tighten it up with this thumb screw here. And this obviously goes off to the tent and will heat your tent. Because the combustion is outside of the tent, you don't get any of the exhaust from the burning, so none of the bad smells, none of the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning, no water vapor, and also in both of these, there's no open flame. Everything's enclosed and contained inside these, and barring catastrophic failure, which is very unlikely with both of them, there's no risk of fire either. The best thing about these though is that you actually heat the air, so you get nice hot air pumped into your tent. The air can come from a couple of places. You could choose to pull in fresh air from outside and heat that, or if you wanted to be a little more efficient, you could pull it from inside the tent, heat it, and then pump it back into the tent. Either way, it's warm, dry air, and you're not adding any moisture to it. And actually, adding the heat will help reduce the relative humidity. Using these things, I've never had a problem with condensation. Let's take a closer look at each of them separately. This is a diesel heater, and while these have been popular for a very long time with the trucking industry, they're just starting to catch on with the camping, the vans, the overlanding side of things. The main reason these are so popular is just that they are incredibly efficient. With about half a gallon of diesel, you can have this thing heating your tent all night long. They also come with a thermostat, so you can set the temperature you want inside your tent. Once it reaches that temperature, it'll back off and just maintain that temperature for the rest of the night, which could save you even a little bit more diesel. Unfortunately, you will need a second battery to run this. When you first start it up, it uses a huge amount of power to get that glow plug going, to get the diesel burning. Once the diesel is burning, you just have to kind of maintain the airflow. So it's just the fan that you're powering for the rest of the night, as well as a fuel pump just to keep the fuel coming in here. It uses about 20 amp hours just to run overnight. This diesel heater is a cheap Chinese knockoff of the Webasto diesel heaters, and like the other heaters, it does come with a full kit of everything you need to kind of install and heat with it. However, this one does need to be installed in or on something. It's best installed this way up, and you have to attach the exhaust, attach everything to it. You can't just lay it on the ground like it is. And also it needs to be kept somewhere that's going to be out of the weather. There are a ton of different ways you can mount it. I mean, you can put it inside a trailer, inside a van, or even just inside a plastic box. I did a little project with this last year, and while it wasn't my favorite project, I put it inside a $10 plastic toolbox. I did get a lot of people saying, oh, that's going to catch fire, that's a horrible idea, it's going to melt everything. Well, the heater itself, it's made out of plastic. The only thing that's going to be hot on the outside of this is the exhaust, which is this one. You just need to keep that off the plastic box or wrap it in exhaust header wrap, and it's not a big deal. If you don't feel like putting the effort into assembling it, mounting it somewhere, you can buy the self-contained units, which has everything you need. And I'll put a link to one of those in the description, but it has everything you need kind of in one metal assembly, about this high, this large, has the fuel tank in there, has this same heater in there. You just attach the ductwork and go. I like mounting it in a box myself, especially if you're going to use something that's watertight. That way you can stick it on a roof rack on the back of a truck and it's not a big issue. Where the ones that come already assembled, you can't leave those outside. You certainly wouldn't want to leave it in the rain. Something that is worth mentioning about this Chinese one and the self-contained Chinese ones is that they are incredibly complicated to use. Especially the thermostat, like I still haven't figured out the thermostat with mine, and the instruction manuals are kind of in English. So if you get one of these, good luck. There are some good videos online that you can watch and kind of figure it out, but I was constantly forgetting how to use the thermostat that came with mine. You do have the option to go with a Webasto heater as well. Now those are a lot more expensive than these. You're looking around $800 for the Webasto diesel heater, where this little Chinese unit was about $120, and then the self-contained Chinese units are around $150. So there's a big difference in price. For the extra money, you do get a slight increase in reliability. You get an instruction manual that's actually in English and you can understand. You get a thermostat that's a lot easier to use, and you're also probably going to get some aftermarket support, where you're probably not going to get any kind of support with this aftermarket from the manufacturer. Webasto do also offer a gasoline or a petrol-powered diesel heater. That doesn't make sense. Petrol-powered heater, but you're looking at about $1,000 for that, which is a lot of money Unfortunately, even the Webasto heaters are not 100% reliable. Breakdowns, issues with them are common, especially, I should say, with these Chinese ones. Usually they're a simple fix, but sometimes you may have to replace a glow plug in there. You may have a carbon buildup from accidental improper use. Some people also complain about the fuel pumps that come with these. These things tap all night long. Now, when I used mine, it wasn't a big deal. It really didn't bother me. I slept through it just fine, but for some people it drives them absolutely nuts. Some suggestions, some ways that people suggest that I fix that or stop it from happening is to suspend them. You can suspend them with rubber bands or with zip ties, and then you don't notice the tapping as bad as when it's fixed to a solid surface. I put a couple of these together earlier in the year, and one of the comments that came up a lot was about the smell of diesel when it burns. Now, when you first start this up, it does smell really strong, but after a few minutes that goes away, and then you really don't notice it for the rest of the night, especially when you're inside the tent. You don't smell it at all. But what does stink is the fuel itself, the diesel fuel. It reeks, and I ended up, unfortunately, I spilled some in the back of my 4Runner, and it soaked into the carpet, and it smelled for weeks afterwards. If you've got a truck, or you can keep it on the roof, or you can keep it in a trailer, then that's not going to be an issue. But if you're keeping it inside a vehicle, be really, really careful, because it smells so bad. I actually ended up giving my diesel heater away to a friend just because I didn't want to risk spilling it again inside the vehicle. He has a trailer, he absolutely loves it. I ended up switching to this, which is the Propex HS2211. This burns propane rather than diesel, and unlike diesel, propane's really easy to transport. Although I will say, if I end up leaking propane, I'll probably have a lot more problems than if I leaked diesel, because, well, it's explosive. Now, I will say this probably looks really complicated, all these things hanging off it, but you have all of these with the diesel heater as well. I actually find this one's a lot easier to transport around than the diesel heater because, well, you have all the wires with the diesel heater still, so you've got, like, this is where the power is going to go to. I plug this into my Jackery. You've got the thermostat plugs in there, and then this is where the fuel goes in, and this is just really easy to screw into the 20-pound propane tank that I have, where with the diesel heater you have the exact same wires, so you got one for the power, one for the thermostat, and you have to have something for the fuel. But with the diesel heater you can't easily unhook the fuel line because you end up leaking diesel everywhere, whereas you can easily unhook the propane one. So while it looks like I've got a whole bunch more on here, it's a lot simpler. Just like the diesel heater, this is a heat exchanger, so it works exactly the same way. All of the combustion is inside here. I have, if I flip it up this way, you got an exhaust here, and the exhaust is exactly the same as the diesel heater one, except it smells even less. And then you got the air input here. And then with this one, you've got the the cold air goes in one of these, and then hot air comes out the other one. So it just circulates exactly the same. And I use the exact same ductwork. So this stuff, just hook it on there and just duct it up to my tent. And again, like the diesel heater, the air that you get from this is clean, it's hot. It's actually a lot hotter than the diesel heater. It's dry, so you're not gonna have issues with condensation. And actually, unlike the diesel heater, the hot air from this is instant. So with the diesel heater, it takes a while for it to warm up and to get going before it blows hot air in. This thing is probably within about 15 to 20 seconds, you've got hot air coming into the tent. This heater is also surprisingly efficient. A 20-pound propane tank will run this thing constantly for about 60 hours, and that works out at about a third of a pound of propane per hour. But I would be surprised if you're running this thing constantly because it is just so hot. This uses about the same amount of power as the diesel heater, so around 20 amp hours of battery power overnight. It's a little bit less than the diesel heater because you don't have the glow plug, which draws a huge amount of power when you first start this up. You're also not powering the pump constantly all night. But the biggest thing that saves power is that the thermostat will actually shut this off when it reaches the temperature you've set it to, so you're not running that fan all night. Now that is great because if you're somewhere that's a little warmer, you are saving some electricity, not having to run that fan. But I also think that that is the biggest disadvantage this has when compared to the diesel heater. That is the fact that it shuts off. Unfortunately, that means it ends up kind of being uncomfortable inside the tent because when this is running, it's really, really hot, so it warms up the tent really quickly, and then it'll shut off for a bit, and the temperature drops back down, and then it starts up again. So you've got some swings in the temperature. Usually what I end up doing is setting the temperature a little low, that way the tent doesn't get stupid hot when it's running, and then it shuts off again until it next needs to start up. Something I like about this over the diesel heater is that this is actually weatherproof. roof. They designed this one, the HS2211, to go underneath a van or a trailer, be permanently mounted there. So it is designed to be exposed to the elements. You do need to make sure, if it is going to be exposed, that it has both the ducts hooked up, all the wires hooked up, the exhaust, the air intake hooked up as well. When I use this, I just sit it on the roof rack in front of my tent, or I sit it on the traction boards that are on the roof rack in front of my tent, hook up the ducts, have them go in through the windows on the tent, and then I'll have the air intake and the exhaust just hang out over the hood or over the side of the vehicle, and it's fine. Rain, snow, hail, whatever, not a big problem. This is also a lot more reliable than the diesel heater, a lot more reliable. There's a lot less stuff to go wrong. It's a lot simpler, so you're not going to have issues. There's no glow plug to go bad, get covered in carbon. Propane burns really cleanly, so you're not going to get a huge carbon buildup inside there. You don't have issues with fuel pumps, fuel lines, that kind of thing getting clogged. And really the only thing they say when you start this up, if it hasn't been run for a long time, is just to allow the dust to clear. Where with the diesel heater, you have to run that thing, according to the manual, you have to run it every 30 days throughout the summer when you're not using it. The only other thing to mention is the price. I was going to say, unfortunately, there are no knockoffs. I actually think that's a good thing. There are knockoffs of the diesel heater, and I think they can get away with it with diesel. I would not buy a knockoff gasoline heater, and I would not buy a knockoff propane heater, because those can be explosive. I wouldn't recommend it. I think that'd be a really bad idea. So you end up spending for this about $800, which is the same as the Webasto diesel heater. And if you're going to pick between the Webasto diesel heater or this Propex propane heater, this is the one to go with. It's a no-brainer. It's awesome. If you have any other suggestions, let me know. I feel like I've covered the main options for keeping warm in the winter, but I may have missed something. I'm sure there's something else out there. I am already anticipating the comments from people who sleep in their shorts at 40 below in a hammock because they're a real man, but this video is not for those people. This is obviously for the rest of us who either enjoy some comfort because we can, or we want to extend the camping season for our families as well as just us. So if you found the video useful, make sure you give it a thumbs up as well. If you want to see more videos like this, or you want to see some adventure videos, then subscribe to the channel as well, and thanks for watching.